All right, let's dive into a story that's both captivating and kind of controversial.
Yeah.
The tale of Harut and Marut.
Oh, this is a good one.
You might not recognize the names right away,
Right.
but their story pops up in a bunch of different religious and cultural traditions.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be looking at a YouTube video today that summarizes them all.
It's fascinating how it comes from Islamic tradition,
Yeah.
but then you find traces of it in Jewish, Armenian,
Wow.
even Hindu and Zoroastrian beliefs.
It's incredible.
It really speaks to how universal these themes are,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
like temptation, forbidden knowledge, going against divine will.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be exploring.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack a few different versions of the story to
Yeah.
see where they agree, disagree, and the big questions they bring up.
Awesome.
So are you ready to get started?
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
Okay, to understand Harut and Marut, we need to start with angels,
Right.
especially in the Abrahamic religions.
Yeah.
Angels are these spiritual beings, messengers, carrying out God's will.
Mm.
The relationship with humans has fascinated people for centuries.
And that relationship is at the core of this Harut and Marut story.
Absolutely.
It's about that interplay between divine and human, about the temptations when those worlds meet.
That brings us to the Islamic narrative, the basis of the whole story.
Okay.
It all starts in the Quran, Surah al-Baqarah, where they're mentioned along with magic and temptation.
It says that God sent them to Babylon as a test of people's faith.
Interesting.
But there's this key line, "Indeed we are a trial, so do not disbelieve." It suggests Harut and Marut weren't just there to teach magic for no reason.
Right.
They were supposed to expose the dangers of straying from God, of seeking power the wrong way.
But this idea of angels as a test of faith is really interesting.
Totally.
It suggests even divine beings are tools for God to reveal what's in people's hearts.
Exactly, and it shows how important free will is.
Right.
God gives humans the choice to follow the right path or fall for temptation.
It's like a cosmic object lesson.
Yeah.
But the Quran leaves a lot open to interpretation.
Right.
Even within Islam, there are different ideas about their mission.
Yeah.
Some connected to the time of Prophet Solomon and magic spreading,
Mm-hmm.
then others focus on them as a purely spiritual test,
Okay.
showing the importance of faith over worldly power.
But we should look beyond the Quran because the story goes further.
Okay.
Things get even more interesting when we look at Jewish tradition.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
The Talmud, a key text in Rabbinic Judaism, gives us a much bigger picture.
And sometimes they use Azel and Shemhazai instead of Harut and Marut,
Wow, really
which is interesting because those names have a whole history in Jewish lore.
fascinating.
But they come to Earth and meet a woman.
And not just any woman.
Nope.
She's described as incredibly beautiful.
Oh, yeah.
Some sources even connect her to the planet Venus.
What?
Like she turned into it or became it.
She becomes Venus?
Right.
That's a twist.
Major celestial beauty. So we've got these angels, this captivating woman, and then it takes a turn you wouldn't expect.
What's that?
It challenges the whole idea of angelic infallibility, isma, as it's called in Islam.
Right.
The idea that angels can't sin, that they're extensions of God's will.
Yeah.
But the Jewish version is different.
How so?
It says the woman tempted the angels.
Okay.
Sometimes she's called Istar or Azahara, meaning the flower in Arabic.
Interesting.
And they gave in to their desires.
No way.
We're talking alcohol, idol worship, even murder in some versions.
Wow.
It's a big contrast to perfect, obedient angels.
Yeah, definitely.
It makes you wonder how these different stories developed.
Right.
What do they say about the cultures they come from?
That's what makes this story so fascinating.
I agree.
It makes us think about how different cultures interpret the same basic story
Yeah.
and what that tells us about those cultures.
How do we even reconcile these interpretations?
That's the question.
Are they both true somehow, or is one a distortion of the other? These questions keep scholars busy.
For sure.
But before we go too deep, let's zoom out for a second.
Good idea.
While the Islamic and Jewish accounts are the most famous, the story doesn't end there.
Right.
It shows up in different forms across many cultures.
It's like an ancient game of telephone.
It really is.
The message goes from culture to culture, changing a bit each time,
Yeah.
but always holding on to the core themes.
Like in Armenian belief, they're worshipped as weather gods.
Really?
And you find similar figures in ancient Indian texts.
Oh, wow.
Powerful beings fighting for power, brought down by a beautiful temptress.
Sounds familiar.
Totally.
Even Zoroastrianism, older than Islam and Judaism,
Wow.
might have a linguistic link to angelic figures of good.
That's amazing.
Makes you wonder how far back this story goes.
And what it meant to those ancient people.
Yeah, the Harut and Marut story, no matter what form it takes,
Mm-hmm.
touches upon something fundamental about being human.
Right.
The struggle between good and evil.
Yeah.
The allure of forbidden knowledge.
For sure. The consequences of giving in to temptation.
It's a story that's been told and retold for centuries.
And it still resonates with us today.
Before we wrap up part 1,
Yeah.
we need to talk about the big question. What happened to them?
Oh, right.
If they were sent on a divine mission, did they return to heaven? Or are they still around somewhere causing trouble?
Well, it depends which version of the story you like.
Oh, okay.
If you go with the Islamic one, where they stayed true to God's command,
Right.
even while tempting others, it makes sense they go back to heaven after
Makes sense.
classic angels doing their job, returning to the divine.
But the Jewish story is different.
How so?
Things get more, well, down to earth.
You could say that.
It's important to remember that while Islam does acknowledge fallen angels,
Right.
like Iblis, who wouldn't bow to Adam,
Yeah.
the idea that Harut and Marut fell to temptation and were punished isn't really accepted in mainstream Islam.
Interesting.
Okay, just to explore, let's follow the Jewish narrative further.
What does it say happened to these angels who, let's say, got caught up in earthly affairs?
The Talmud is dramatic. It describes them being punished.
Oh, wow.
And it's pretty intense. Picture this.
Okay.
They're hung upside down in a well in Babylon.
Upside down in a well.
Yeah.
That's not how I imagined angelic retirement.
Right.
It gets even more intense.
Oh, no.
The well is filled with smoke, stinging their eyes, and they're surrounded by water, but they can't drink any of.
That's rough.
It's brutal. Meant to show how serious their transgression was.
Wow, that's heavy.
Physical pain, being right next to something they need but can't have.
Right.
It's like a metaphor for unfulfilled desire.
Exactly.
It shows that actions have consequences.
Yeah.
Okay, so physical pain, the water they can't drink,
Mm-hmm.
almost like they're trapped in divine purgatory, their senses tormented forever.
Wait, didn't the video also say something about them having kids?
Oh, yeah.
That's another fascinating part from Jewish tradition.
Right.
Some sources say after their fall, they became mortal.
Really?
And as mortals, they had children.
Interesting.
It's even said their descendants died in Noah's flood.
Whoa, hold on.
We went from angels on a mission to fallen angels suffering.
Yeah,
And now they're ancestors of a lineage wiped out by a flood.
that's quite the journey.
Shows the power of storytelling, doesn't it?
It really does.
How one story can change and mean new things over time.
Absolutely.
And it shows how different cultures think about good and evil, divine justice, and free will.
But let's remember, these are just interpretations.
Right.
The Quran doesn't say what happened to them exactly.
Yeah.
And the Talmud is known for its colorful and metaphorical storytelling.
Yeah.
So the image of them in that well is striking,
Yeah.
but it's really a symbol of their fall from grace.
Whether that fall was real or metaphorical,
Mhm.
whether they went back to heaven or were punished forever,
Yeah.
we just don't know.
And that's what's so fascinating about it.
Totally.
It's open to different interpretations, to thinking about it yourself.
Yeah.
It makes us consider what we believe about angels,
Okay.
about free will, about the consequences of straying from the right path.
Absolutely.
That's what we love about these deep dives.
Me too.
Uncovering old stories, exploring different ways to see them,
Right.
and ultimately leaving you, the listener, with more questions and answers.
Because sometimes the best stories are the ones that keep us wondering.
Well said. But before we give in to the mystery completely,
Oh,
there's one more twist to this story,
really?
and it goes beyond Islam and Judaism into a whole other world of belief.
Ooh, I'm intrigued.
Me too. Okay, so last time we left off wondering about what happened to Harut and Marut.
Right.
And as promised, we're going to look at different accounts of what happened to them after their time on Earth.
Their final fate really depends on which interpretation of the story you find most compelling.
True.
Like if you stick with the Islamic version where they stayed true to God's command,
Right.
even while tempting others, it makes sense they would have gone back to heaven once they finished their mission.
Yeah, like classic angels following orders,
Indeed.
turning to the divine.
But if we look at the Jewish narrative, things get a lot more...
Down to Earth.
Yeah, you could say that.
It's important to remember, though, that Islam does acknowledge fallen angels.
Right, like Iblis.
Exactly, who refused to bow to Adam.
Yeah.
But the idea that Harut and Marut themselves fell to temptation and were punished isn't really accepted in mainstream Islamic thought.
Okay, I see.
So just to explore, let's follow the Jewish narrative a little further.
Okay.
What does it say happened to these angels who, let's say, got a little too caught up in earthly matters?
Well, the Talmud doesn't hold back on the drama.
Oh, no.
It describes them being punished for what they did,
Oh,
and the punishment is pretty intense.
I bet.
Okay, picture this. They're hung upside down in a well in Babylon.
Upside down. And a well.
Yeah.
That's definitely not how I pictured angelic retirement.
Right. And it gets even worse.
Oh, no. What else?
The well is filled with smoke that stings their eyes.
Ouch.
And even though there's water all around them, they can't drink any of it.
Wow, that's a pretty brutal image.
Yeah, it's meant to show how serious what they did was.
Right.
Their actions led them to this state of constant suffering.
Right. So we've got physical pain. We've got this water they can't drink.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like they're in some kind of divine purgatory.
Right.
Their senses are tormented forever.
But hold on, didn't the YouTube video mention something about them having kids?
Oh, yeah, that's another part from Jewish tradition.
Interesting.
Some sources say that after their fall, they lost their angelic qualities and became mortal.
What? Really?
And as mortals, they fathered children.
Wow.
Some even suggest that their descendants were wiped out in Noah's flood.
So we go from angels on a divine mission
Right.
to fallen angels in eternal torment.
Yeah.
And now they're the ancestors of a whole lineage that was wiped out by a biblical flood.
It really shows how powerful storytelling is.
How one story can evolve and take on so many new meanings over time.
It's amazing.
And it highlights how different cultures grapple with these big questions.
Oh, good and evil.
Yeah. Divine justice, free will.
Absolutely. But it's important to remember that these are just interpretations.
Right.
The Quran doesn't explicitly say what happened to them.
Yeah,
And the Talmud is known for its colorful and sometimes metaphorical storytelling.
that's true.
So while the image of these angels hanging upside down in a smoky well is a striking one,
Yeah.
it's ultimately a symbolic representation of their fall from grace.
Exactly.
Whether that fall was literal or metaphorical,
Right.
whether they went back to heaven or faced eternal punishment,
Yeah,
we just don't know for sure. And that's part of what makes this story so fascinating, isn't it?
definitely.
It allows for different interpretations, for personal reflection.
Mhm.
It makes us think about what we believe,
Yeah.
about the nature of angels, about free will,
Yeah.
about the consequences of straying from a righteous path. And even if we put aside all the theological stuff,
Okay.
the story itself is just so compelling.
It really is.
Two powerful beings sent from heaven,
Right.
tempted by earthly desires, ultimately facing a fate shrouded in mystery.
It's a story that's been told and retold for centuries for a reason.
It speaks to something deep within us.
Something that resonates across cultures and across time.
And that's what we love about these deep dives.
Me too.
Uncovering these ancient tales, exploring their different interpretations,
Mhm.
and ultimately leaving you, the listener, with more questions than answers.
Because sometimes the most captivating stories are the ones that keep us wondering.
Well said. But before we completely surrender to the mystery,
Yeah.
there's one more fascinating twist to the Harut and Marut story that we haven't even touched on yet.
Oh, there's more.
And this one takes us beyond Islamic and Jewish tradition into a whole other realm of belief. Okay, so we've explored the Islamic and Jewish versions of this Harut and Marut story. Divine missions, forbidden knowledge, those temptresses, and those pretty intense punishments.
Yeah, it's a wild ride.
But you're saying there's even more to this story.
Oh, there's always more. What's really amazing is how this story, which we think of as coming from Abrahamic traditions,
Yeah.
actually has parallels in all sorts of cultures.
Interesting.
We briefly talked about the Armenian belief, where they're seen as weather gods.
Right.
But there's so much more to uncover.
Okay, I'm all ears.
What other cultural flavors does this story take on?
Yeah. What else is out there?
Well, let's jump over to ancient India for a second.
Okay.
In the Mahabharata, one of the most important Sanskrit epics, you find these two super powerful beings called the Ashvins.
Okay.
They're connected to healing, dawn and dusk, all this celestial stuff.
Wow.
But here's the thing. They get into this power struggle,
Oh.
vying for supremacy, and guess what?
What's that?
A beautiful temptress is involved in their downfall.
No way.
It's like the woman as temptress is everywhere,
It really is.
even across different cultures and time periods.
So these Indian Ashvins,
Yeah.
they're powerful, they get tempted, they fall from grace. What happens to them?
Do they get the upside down well treatment too?
Right, exactly.
Not quite. Their punishment is more poetic, I guess you could say.
Okay.
The god Brahma basically tells them,
Hmm.
You messed up, you'll be worshipped around the world.
Wow.
But no one can look directly at you, you'll be too bright.
Really?
It's like they're forced to be dazzling but untouchable.
Denied direct worship, forever dazzling but distant.
Right.
It makes you think about how differently cultures think about divine justice.
It really does, reflecting cultural values and beliefs.
Absolutely.
But wait, there's one more stop on our tour,
Okay.
and it might be the most surprising. Zoroastrianism.
Zoroastrianism. I don't know much about that one.
Okay, so it's one of the oldest monotheistic religions, older than Judaism and Christianity.
Wow.
And while it doesn't have a direct Harut and Marut story, there's a cool linguistic link.
Oh, what's that?
The Encyclopedia Britannica says the names Harut and Marut
Yeah.
might actually come from two of the Ameshasphentas,
Okay.
these angelic beings associated with good in Zoroastrianism.
Hold on. So you're saying
Yeah.
these potentially fallen angels in Islamic and Jewish tradition, right,
Yep.
might come from good figures in an even older religion.
That's wild.
It shows how connected these ancient beliefs and stories can be.
It really does.
How something that starts as temptation and punishment can become a story of power and justice,
Right.
and then maybe even goes back to these good figures from a totally different religion.
It's like peeling back layers of history
Yeah.
and realizing nothing is isolated, everything's connected somehow.
It's like seeing this tapestry of human belief.
Exactly.
All these threads woven together over centuries and continents. But let's come back down to earth for a second.
Okay.
What does all this mean for us regular folks?
Right, the listeners. That's the beauty of it, these ancient stories. Even the ones that seem so fantastical,
Yeah,
they make us think about our own beliefs,
they really do.
question our own values.
Even if we don't literally believe in angels hanging out in wells,
Right.
the story still makes us think about temptation, about the consequences of our choices.
Yeah. About how tempting forbidden knowledge can be.
And those themes are just as relevant today.
Absolutely they are.
So as you go about your day,
Yeah.
maybe you're reaching for that extra cookie
Okay.
or scrolling social media when you should be working,
Right.
or maybe just daydreaming about winning the lottery.
Instead of focusing on what you need to do.
Exactly. And in those moments,
Yeah.
maybe the story of Harut and Marut will come to mind.
And you might ask yourself, am I giving in to temptation?
Am I chasing something that'll lead to my downfall?
Or am I sticking to my own personal code, my own divine will?
It's like these ancient stories are reminders that we're not so different from the people who came before us.
We all face temptations,
We make choices.
and those choices have consequences.
Maybe by thinking about these stories,
Yeah.
we can learn from the past and make better choices in our own lives.
Well said.
That's a great takeaway.
On that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Harut and Marut.
Thanks for joining us on this journey.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We hope you enjoyed exploring these different versions of the story and that it sparks some thoughts and questions. Remember, the journey doesn't end here.
Right.
Keep exploring. Keep questioning.
Who knows what stories you'll find?
Exactly.
Until next time, keep diving deep.